All right, so this is another in the series of our traditional meads, and Brittlebush is kind of cool. It's everywhere around the desert, right? It's all over California, Utah, down into Mexico, of course in Arizona. And this honey actually came from Brittlebush blossoms that were growing close to this old dog racing track in Black Canyon City, which is kind of, you know, a little past halfway to Phoenix if you're driving down the 17.
Right.
And the Brittlebush flower comes out in the spring, and it looks like a daisy kind of. It's this cool, bright yellow flower. It's one of those just classic desert wildflowers you see. And so, like with any varietal honey, the beekeeper was able to say, hey, the bees for the time of making this honey were predominantly going to Brittlebush flowers. It's also a medicinal plant, and the Tohono O'odham tribe in southern Arizona would they would use it to seal things, and the kids would chew the resin like chewing gum and stuff.
Very cool.
They would use it for toothaches and different things in traditional medicine. So yeah, Brittlebush is a pretty interesting.
It's really good.
I don't think I've ever tried the honey from it.
I've never had it. Yeah, it's divine.
Oh wow.
Soft.
I can eat some bug legs. There's a bee, literally the bee's knees, right there.
Yeah, this is really good.
Yeah.
It's very clean, got a little citrus to it.
Yeah, what are some other flavor characteristics that you guys can pull out of here?
I'm getting the citrus from it. There's no bitterness, really.
Totally agree. And in the finish, am I crazy to think I can almost taste coconut in the finish?
No, I could see that for sure.
Absolutely.
It's like that vanilla coconut.
It starts
sweetness.
off like citrusy.
Right.
And then, yeah, there's some herbal notes, a bit of minerality, and then, yeah, for me, that's crazy.
That is, it's cool to see different flavors that people can pull from it too.
Right.
Right on. Well, let's get this stuff in.
Yeah.
I'll take a turn up on the ladder if you guys want to pass me a bucket.
Absolutely.
And I've got honey on my hands, so I've got grit ready to go.
Perfect.
All right, I'm gonna stage it on the top step for a second.
Cool.
Your hands free. All right,
Very
60
good.
pounds of honey.
Look at that color.
That is beautiful.
Liquid gold.
So in this project of making traditional meads that we're going to release probably by the end of the year, we've got a map, like a topographic map of the area where the bees were actually grabbing the nectar from these Brittlebush blossoms. But every single label in the series is going to indicate the part of Arizona where the bees were doing their work. And it's going to be really interesting to see how these honeys turn out. There's going to be similarities, I bet, and also some pretty cool differences. And I can't wait to do a flight of our 10 traditional meads. So we're going to do 9 with different honeys and then a blend of all 10 to represent the whole state and our 10th year of being in business. That is heavy. So have you guys made many traditional meads, you know, as far as how it's going to go? Like, what do you think about since you've been here doing some mead making?
I love making the traditionals. Like you spoke on, it reminds me a lot of making lagers and beer. You know, you're really just showcasing the ingredients, no adjuncts, just really letting the honey shine. I really like that aspect of it.
Nathan, what are some of your favorite meads that you've made since you've been here?
It's a hard question. I really like the Queen Jasmine we made, that Masumoto peach mead. That was lovely. Working with the peaches and the nectarines was a lot of fun. I really like the meads that we get to ferment fruit on, the melomels. Lex Lumen is another one I really enjoy.
All right, I got it.
Cool.
All right, number 3. Whoa! So everything we do in mead making is kind of like what they call cold side brewing, where you can't let anything get into the product that's going to introduce bacteria or anything that would cause off flavors. So we've cleaned and sanitized this, and the outside of this bucket is a little funky, so we're being careful not to get any sort of material in there that we don't want. So when you're making mead, you make a huge sticky mess, and then you clean it up, and somewhere in the middle there you create something magical. All right, thank you, and I've got it.
Cool.
1, 2, 3. I could not hold that at arm's length and stay on the ladder.
Yeah. What's your favorite varietal you've had so far, if you had to choose?
You know, I love Arizona mesquite. I mean, one reason why we use it so much is because we have so many mesquite trees and
Right.
so much of the honey available. So we're able, from a, you know, just a production standpoint, we can rely on that. I think it's just delicious. And at Crockett's Honey, where we get a lot of our honey from, they have a guy and his whole job is blending honey to make sure it's consistent from batch
Right.
to batch, because, you know, the time of year that the beekeeper's going to pull honey from the hives can affect the flavor.
Right.
And, you know, this is the terroir. I mean, that's like this project. I mean, I think the word, you know, we use it a lot, right? But really, we're going to be able to express the terroir of Arizona and the desert and the mountains
Right.
with this project, which is really kind of cool. I mean, this is just as natural as you get,
Yeah.
you know, bee parts and all coming out of this honey.
Really just showcases the natural flavors in the state.
My day-to-day stuff, you know, you get caught up in so many different pursuits, and it's so cool to get back to making mead and to be making a traditional mead in this way with this honey, where we know the beekeeper, we know where the bees were working, we know this part of the state, but at the same time, I've never tried this honey, and
Right.
it's new. And that's one of the coolest things about this job. There's always something new that we're able to create and experience.
I love how connected we are to the ingredients too. The fact that we do keep it local and we care so much about the honey.
You can't fake this level of authenticity, man.
No, you can't.
We're just,
It's too much work. Too much work to fake that.
so Nathan, in this batch, how did you calculate and forecast what the alcohol is going to be based on the honey that we're mixing in with the water right now?
Yeah, so we kind of have a general sugar content with our honey, and we know what the gravity will be like based off of how much water we dilute it with. So in this instance, since we are adding a bit more water, we can shorthand the water at the beginning at the must so that we account for that difference. We can also take gravity after we add the honey and add a little more if we need to, if we dilute it too much.
Yeah, that's a cool point. So, and a good strategy.
Right.
We have a volume, a certain amount of honey, water that we're all going to mix together to make this product have the end result that we've visualized.
This one needs to be scraped.
Gotcha. And if we start it that high, you can't take it away.
Exactly.
So by starting with a lower volume of water, and get a good grip here, we get all the honey that's going to go in, and then we just add water at the end to sort of top off the batch so that the recipe is going to work out the way we want. And we know that if you had 5 gallons of water and honey mixed together, every pound of honey can turn into 1% alcohol by volume. And when it comes to sugar and fermentation, that scales up. Even if we're doing this in one of the big tanks right behind us, we just keep doing the math.
Yep.
But that's not always true for all ingredients, like with hops, for example, you know, or vanilla beans. You don't necessarily have it scale up evenly.
Right. And it varies on the batch, it varies on the yield. And that's something we can kind of run into with honey, is some moisture content. But since we get it from regular suppliers, it's pretty consistent.
That's true. You know, one of the most interesting things I ever experienced with honey was trying honey from Brazil made by these stingless bees called Melipona bees.
Okay.
Have you ever seen that or heard of this?
No, I have not.
So in Central and South America, and even the Caribbean, like we were in Cuba and got honey from Melipona bees.
Wow.
And so these bees are like maybe like a tenth the size of a normal honeybee. So they don't even look like the bees you're familiar with.
Right.
And because they don't have stingers, you don't have to wear any protective gear to work with them, which is cool. But they live in these tiny little, I mean in nature, they're gonna live in like a crook of a tree or whatever. And even their hive looks different. It's kind of like got these like bulbous bubbles instead of like, you know, honeycomb they're used to seeing.
Right.
And so they make honey and they extract it with like a syringe and a tube. It's I mean, tiny bees make a little bit of honey.
Right.
And so, you know, when you're doing beekeeping in America with our bees, beekeeper can pull, you know, like 60 pounds of honey out of a hive at a really good pull, I've been told. I've never measured that, right? I've been part of it a little bit in extracting honey in a spinner and all that, but with these Melipona bees, there's not a great way that I've heard of for them to sort of commercially use the honey, so it's really expensive. But the moisture content seems to be a lot higher.
Okay.
Because it pours out more like maple syrup than this, you know, sticky, gooey stuff.
Right.
And you can kind of like drink it like that.
Damn.
But and so I assumed the sugar content would be lower, but we actually tested it and it was actually a little higher.
Interesting.
So
Just a
yeah,
completely
whole different
consistency,
species
yeah.
and yeah.
Could make some interesting mead.
Yeah, I helped start a meadery in Brazil, and the first product we ever made was a traditional mead, and it wound up winning a medal at the Mazer Cup for traditional mead, which was kind of cool.
That's awesome. It's probably such a unique flavor too.
Yeah, I mean, you think tropical, or at least, I mean, you think about Brazil,
Right.
and it really did have cool tropical flavors, like even like passion fruit and stuff that you just wouldn't get here. But I was surprised to find that sort of coconut flavor in the end of this guy, which was really pleasant.
Yeah, I would love to try some of that honey.
All right,
There it is.
Brittlebush traditional in the can. All right, Tim, let's do some science.
Absolutely.
So what are we doing here?
Anytime we create a must, we've just created our Brittlebush traditional must. We want to check our original gravity, which is measured in specific gravity, to make sure that our sugar content is what we were aiming for, because our sugar content gives us our potential alcohol by volume for our finished fermented product. And we wanted to be at 1106, and we are right at 1106, so we nailed our gravity dead on.
Right on, dude.
Yeah.
So if this was water, then this hydrometer in the jar would be floating right at 0, right?
Yeah, so it would be reading at 1.000 specific gravity.
So this hydrometer is designed with this scale, and it tells us the potential alcohol and some other figures on there, and it has this weight in here, and we've got this airspace that allows it to float, and we always spin it, let it settle, and then you look at, you've got the meniscus, right? Like the little
Right.
curve that comes up, but you actually want to visualize it where it's flat.
Yes.
So you've got to have this jar on a flat surface, and it's not exactly where the line hits from the meniscus, but just a touch below it.
Yes,
if you're
indeed.
being
Yeah,
scientific.
Exactly. If you're taking proper measurement. So yeah, the water's cohesive and adhesive, so what it does is it climbs up the column of that hydrometer, so you're not actually getting an accurate measurement at that line. You want to read below that. It's really nice, beautiful color. It's gonna be a great mead.
That is a beautiful gold. It reminds me of the Brittlebush flowers even that are
Yeah,
yellow that this
absolutely.
honey came from.
It's gorgeous.
So we've got to get this all dialed in, and we did exactly where we want it before we put the yeast in to
Right.
start doing its job.
Absolutely.
And so there's a technique that we'll use sometimes where it's called feeding the fermentation. And so it's a sort of a trick in order to get the yeast to make more alcohol than maybe it would otherwise be able to do
Right.
by adding honey along the way. And then there's a whole another sort of set of math equations that you have to do to really make that prediction happen.
Right.
And just to make sure that our math is perfect, whenever we do something new and it's important, we'll send a sample off to a lab and we can get an exact ABV on our
Right.
product. And this is really important not just for recipe development, but the way that we pay taxes as a company, as a winery making mead, is often based on the ABV.
Right.
And there are rules that come from the wine world. I mean, almost everything that applies to us comes from winemaking.
Yeah.
And in the wine world, sometimes grapes are sweeter or less sweet,
Right.
depending on when they pick them in the season and everything that goes into making the grapes be what they are at the time of harvest. And so you're allowed a little leeway.
Right.
And so if something is below about 14%, then you've got about 1.5
Okay.
leeway.
Right.
And if it's above, you've got to be within 1%. Whereas like with spirits,
Yeah.
you got to be dead on,
Absolutely.
as far as I know, with the spirits rules.
Right.
So determining the alcohol is really important. And we're going to take notes along the way. And it also tells us, as the fermentation happens, at what point do we stop adding oxygen and
Yeah.
add certain nutrients. So this is the science side of mead making. And it's not hard, but you've got to take
Every day.
notes, make
Every single
decisions.
day.
Yeah. It's changing, because as soon as that yeast starts working, by sometime tomorrow,
Oh, yeah.
then this hydrometer is going to be, if we measure it, it'll be down here, down here, down
Right.
here, and it'll keep sinking as the sugar goes away.
Right, and it'll be a very different environment for the yeast too. And so we want to keep that environment from being as hostile as possible. So we'll be nurturing it along the way.
Yeah, that's our whole approach at Superstition for making mead, is to have a relatively neutral fermentation,
Right.
as opposed to certain wine and definitely beer styles where
Oh,
you're
yeah.
going to choose a yeast and the right temperature and everything, of course, to get certain flavor characteristics
Right.
out of the yeast. We want to really showcase the flavor characteristics from the honey
Yeah.
or the fruit, the barrel, whatever ingredients go
Right.
in. So that's sort of how we work on the artistic side.
Yeah, absolutely.
But it all starts with science.
Sure does.
Cool. So these are our yeast nutrients, help promote yeast health. We got DAP and Firm K in there.
Right on. So this is going to give the yeast the tools it needs to do its job in the healthiest possible environment.
Exactly.
So, yeah, traditional meads like we're making today, they don't really have everything that fruit and other sorts of ingredients sometimes that we use offer.
Right.
So, yeah, yeast nutrients. Ready to go. And
There she is.
wake up yeast.
Yeah, it'll be slow moving for today, but starting tomorrow, this tank will be ripping.
Right on.
Yeah.
Cool. Should
Very
we mix
cool.
that up or are we good to go?
No, I'll mix it up a bit for you.
Cool.
Excuse me, Vinny. Yeah, so our honey is kind of void of a lot of those proteins that we want for yeast health. Grain or fruit, like Jeff spoke on, has a lot of that, so this will just help assist it. Cool.
There we go.
That's good.
Thank you, sir. All right, fermentation's going to be going off soon. Nice, just the weight of the lid.
Just the weight of the lid.
So this is about the biggest size. We do fermentations in 300-gallon cubes. It's not full of 300 gallons when we do
Right.
that. This guy can hold 200 gallons, and what we've learned is at this temperature, we can do this and be okay. And I say that because during a fermentation, it's an exothermic reaction. It means that it's creating heat. That's one of the things that happens, is the yeast is doing its job, taking the sugar, turning it into alcohol, CO2, and all these flavors that we know and love. And if we were to try and do that in one of these tanks, it would get so hot, there's so much thermal mass that happens that we have to have glycol. It doesn't literally, it sounds like it touches the product, it doesn't, but in these tanks, there are these jackets, and glycol will run through the outside of the tank in this layer to keep everything at the right temperature. With these guys, the temperature, we can't control it. I mean, there's some crazy techniques if you
Yeah.
had to, but it's not gonna get hot enough to actually make a difference to create an off flavor. But this is about the biggest size batch that we would try and do that with.
Right.
And we figured that out through trial and error over the
Exactly.
years. So that's why we can pull this off. And these tanks are kind of cool because they're plastic. They're actually high HPDE,
Right.
high density polyethylene, HDPE tanks. And they have they don't impart any flavor to the product. They're really easy to clean. They're light. We can move them around. They still have the valves that we need to go and do what we do when we're managing the fermentation, adding oxygen and whatnot. But they also mimic a neutral barrel when it comes to micro-oxidation.
Right.
So as we age things in here, if we were blending products coming out of barrels or tanks or whatever, these are super useful. and not as sexy as stainless steel or barrels in some ways, but a really important sort of, tool in our toolbox.
Yeah. And they're naturally more antibacterial, antimicrobial. Like, they're pretty clean vessels to be working in.
All right. Be back for more science tomorrow.